Okay, hello. So my name's Aliye. I'm a freelance viola player as well as working for Oxford's Period Instrument Orchestra, Instruments of Time and Truth, where I'm the administrator as well as playing for the ensemble. At the last night of the proms this year, the conductor laureate of the BBC SO, Sir Andrew Davies, turned to talk to the audience. Some of you may have watched it and listened to it. There were 6,000 people in the Albert Hall that night and countless thousands listening around the world. He said, I won't tell you all of it because it was quite long, music is not mere entertainment, but rather one of the most powerful forces for good that we have. It has the power to unite us in beauty and in strength. Sir Andrew's words will ring true for anyone who loves classical music. What many don't realise is that music is hugely beneficial for our economy in the UK. The music industry itself generates £4.4 billion of revenue for our economy every year, and £2.5 billion of that is export revenue from touring activity in the EU. Those figures are quite staggering, really, when you think about it. In a recent poll by the Incorporated Society of Musicians, a third of polled musicians said that 50% or more of their income comes from engagements in the EU. As it stands at the moment, if we go to work in the EU, it's quite simple. And as a result of that, sometimes you can be asked really quite late to jump in on a project. You might get an email from a group in France saying, we need someone in 4 days in Paris, can you come? Well, the answer is, if I have my tax form from HMRC saying that I'm a UK taxpayer, I can just jump on a train or a plane with my instrument. I go, and because of the tax form, the French tax people will not deduct their tax from my fee. I'm paid, and I pay tax on it in the UK. So it's a really simple system. By contrast, I went to America on tour last year, and for that I got a work visa, which was, as you probably know, those of you that have done it, it's not an impossible process, but a little tricky. And then I had to get a passport for my instrument, which was the most bizarre thing. So I took my viola to Oxford Violins and said, I have to have a passport. I don't know what I need to do. And they said, we don't know what you need to do either. Let's look at it together. And they put together a list of items that they were pretty sure were in my viola. You run into some really funny things, like there are two almost identical kinds of rosewood, one of which is perfectly fine to take into the US, one of which, if they think it's in your instrument, they can destroy it on the spot. So it was quite a daunting prospect to get that paperwork together, but I managed it, and my instrument was not destroyed on the spot when I landed in Chicago. It was all fine. Now, of course, it's very unlikely that that sort of measure is going to come into play overnight when we leave the EU. But of course, no one's really sure of anything at the moment, and that is just one example of the sort of bureaucracy that can spring up when you lose a common rule book. For UK ensembles wanting to travel to the EU, there's a cost involved with getting together all the paperwork that you need. If an ensemble applies for work visas for all of its musicians or singers, suddenly you've got to have an administrator doing that. You have to pay for the visas, you have to pay the person who's doing that job. Presumably you then have to add that onto your fee for a UK promoter. So I wonder, suddenly a festival in Spain that wants to book Instruments of Time and Truth might decide in a couple of years' time, well, actually, there's a group in France that doesn't need to get the visas, so maybe we'll just book them. Makes sense, really. Also, would an orchestra in Paris still want me if they have to process my paperwork? It's quite a scary prospect, but actually some orchestras, I've heard in Germany that there are friends of mine in the UK who had work offered to them with German orchestras. That's now been retracted because those orchestras are uncertain about what's going to happen, as are we all. So already the uncertainty really is bad for business. 2 training opportunities have already been lost to Brexit in the UK. The European Union Youth Orchestra and the European Union Baroque Orchestra, which some of you may know because their headquarters were in Woodstock for 30 years, in fact. Nothing like those training schemes is actually available in the UK. I say that as someone who was a member of the European Union Baroque Orchestra for 2 years. It shaped my path into the profession, and it marked me out when I graduated as somebody who had that level of experience that just gave me an edge on other people. It makes me really sad to think that our musicians coming out of music college aren't going to get those chances anymore. The other issue, of course, in terms of education, is will music colleges start charging non-UK EU nationals the £23,000 a year that they currently charge non-home students? If so, how many will miss out? Additionally, of course, how many music college professors earn enough to count as one of Theresa May's highly skilled workers? Extrapolating from what we know so far about Brexit, it paints a pretty grim picture going forward for the next generation of classical musicians. As I mentioned already, I work as the administrator for Instruments of Time and Truth. In an extraordinary move, we didn't plan this date, I should say that now. We leave the UK to tour to Spain on March the 29th next year. I'll say it again, we didn't choose the date. We currently have no idea of what we need to prepare. We're taking a group of about 45 musicians to Spain for a week. We don't know if we have to get work visas, instrument passports. We're just waiting to see. It's not a great feeling. We'd like to know, ideally. So, Paul McCreesh, the artistic director of the Gabrieli Consort and Players, sums up the situation for musicians as follows. Let's be realistic. Leaving the EU is not going to prevent the Berlin Philharmonic from appearing at proms, nor will opera houses in Vienna, Paris or Madrid cease to engage the most renowned soloists. But the axe will fall very hard on thousands of hard-working UK-based musicians who are likely to face drastic loss of earnings. With 176 days until we leave the EU, the Musicians' Union is lobbying for multi-entry visas for the creative industries to try and soften the blow. The reality in our area of industry, as with so many, as we already heard in fact, is that the uncertainty is bad for business and it's already having an impact. To keep the UK as a thriving centre for classical music, it is really essential that we retain freedom of movement post-Brexit. Festivals such as the BBC Proms and the Edinburgh Festival offer an amazing platform for classical music across the world. As UK musicians, we do not want to lose our place on this stage. Thank you.